You're tuned in to the MtG Cable cast, where they cover Magic, the Gathering finance. All right? You don't know about it? You're tuned in right now and get ready to learn some shit. Buckle your seatbelts and light a blunt and get ready for the MtG Cable cast. Starring Reptar and Thirsty, them onion head motherfuckers.
Alrighty, guys, welcome to the newest episode of the Cabalcast, and this week we're doing part 2 of 2 on our Q4/2023 earnings call review, where we get to give our very sensationalized opinions about how awful it was for everything.
Correct.
So, who's taking it away?
So I think that our first 3 points out of 4 basically all just kind of roll together. We can start up top pretty quickly with what I wanted to talk about, I guess, and that is when we take a look at the shares of this company, because it's publicly traded, we see what is effectively a pretty doom and gloom story in that across the year, Hasbro lost about $10.73 per share, adjusted net earnings, and there is a little bit of a positive spin here in that the diluted shares are up $2.51. And like we talked about last time, undiluted earnings per share tell you how the company is doing today. So the net negative is how we're doing today. But the company's stock, the diluted shares, what they would look like if the company had no immediate issue, is up $2.51 in comparison. So there is this kind of rosy outlook at the end of E1. Now that we're done with that, now that we have hopefully dealt with all of the brands that either are no longer in existence in E1 for various reasons, or the brands that we want to keep. And then that pulls away one of our largest negatives, so we should be able to operate in the positives moving forward. Great, $2.51. The ass end of this is that of the $10.73 that was lost per share, $7.64 were lost in Q4 alone, and the net earnings per diluted share was only 38 cents. So that means Q4 had the largest loss and the smallest gain if the company basically had no issues at all. There was no goodwill to write down, that there was no insolvent inventory, that there were no production problems or nothing plaguing the organization on the whole. Q4 was down 75% in the non-diluted shares, and up 38 cents in diluted, and that is ridiculous, as we will talk about as we move into some of what you wanted to say.
Yeah, and again, it is so wild to me to see a company, and this again goes to the mismanagement of Wizards of the Coast. How do you lose money on the fourth quarter when you're a toy company? I don't understand. I don't understand how you see a loss on the year because of how bad your fourth quarter is. It's mind-boggling to me. Mm-hmm. I don't understand. I get being down compared to the previous year. Cool. I don't get a 75% loss in the value of your non-diluted shares. That's insane.
Yep.
It boggles my mind.
Especially Baldur's Gate 3 was a Q4 release as well, correct? Or was it Q3?
October. So like tail end of... Yeah, that was basically Q4.
Q4.
Yeah.
So you had Baldur's Gate 3 in there as well. So you had money coming in hand over fist for that. Like, how did you lose so much in Q4 alone?
Yeah.
We knew this year wasn't going to be great. We knew that was the case in 2023 when there was discussion about insolvent or illiquid inventory, effectively insolvent inventory, when E1 was basically just the anchor around the org, that there were rumors that Hasbro was going to be looking to shop either all of E1 or a number of the properties contained in or by E1, and it did not look like it would be this bad. It's almost as if they shoved as much loss into Q4 as possible. Like somehow they just cooked the books and just pushed all the loss. They just rolled all the negativity into Q4 for 2023.
Yeah, I don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me. I don't understand how you can be so bad at your job and keep it. And speaking of being bad at your job, one of the wildest, so there was a point that I harped on for a little bit in the last episode, and it was the tabletop revenue increasing by 1% behind growth in Magic the Gathering after the strong performance from Tales of Middle-earth. Okay, so you have what you are telling everyone is the greatest selling set in the entire history of your company ever, that they have ever seen, and you only saw 1% growth. What are you doing? How? Because the whole point of Universes Beyond was let's cross market. Let's get people into this that weren't otherwise involved. Let's try to get some of them here and in so they can check it out and see what's going on. It'll be awesome. Okay, Lord of the Rings was the biggest IP you've had by a pretty wide margin. And I think even with all the uproar over the Final Fantasy stuff next year and the Marvel stuff after that,
yeah.
I think until the Marvel stuff, this will still be the biggest IP you have had. That being the case, how do you only grow 1% and then decide to double down and do it 2 times a year when you continually cite, oh, we're higher than expected royalty costs. That's why the profit's not as much. Well, that excuse doesn't hold water anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Like you are milking the cow as much as you possibly can, and that cow is dehydrated and ready to die. It just wants to give up. Just let it go. And it's riding this into the sunset, seemingly, of, well, we're going to bring more licenses in and we're going to get more crossover. But from what you're telling us, the crossover doesn't exist. It doesn't last. It's not bringing enough people in when, admittedly, a Universes Beyond product is basically made for the holidays.
Yeah.
It's made to give to people that like these two things because, my grandson likes Lord of the Rings and Magic the Gathering. Let me just buy this because I don't know better. There were holiday gift packs for it, for Christ's sake. That's bad. That is very bad, and again, points to more of Hasbro's mismanagement of Wizards of the Coast itself, not to mention, again, Q4. And I get it. You did see a 10% increased revenue for licensed gaming because of Baldur's Gate. That's fine. Good. You did a good thing. You did a smart thing that you should have done years ago. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, licensing stuff into your products is costing you more money and barely growing the game. If that's the point of it, why are you doing it? Because you're not doing it properly.
The one thing that always strikes me as interesting here is that these bullet points, in particular for tabletop revenue, are under Wizards of the Coast and digital gaming segments, right? And then we talk about tabletop revenue increasing by 1%. And then the operating profit margin declining, and the operating profit margin of 36.1% due to higher royalty costs, right? But then you go on to say that the full year Hasbro Inc. revenue declined 15%. We knew that, with growth in the Wizards of the Coast and digital gaming segment 10%, which more than offset the declines in consumer product segment 19% and the entertainment segment 31%, both of those being down. So WotC and the digital gaming segment were up 10%, yet tabletop was up 1%. So that basically leaves you to assume that 9% overhead is in the digital side of things. That being anything digital related to D&D, so Baldur's Gate or any of the digital products that WotC sells for AD&D, etc.
Yeah.
Or if there was still money coming in from Moto last year, Arena Mobile, etc., like that kind of stuff. And so that weird separation always strikes me as being really odd when you're trying to show these numbers and try and treat WotC as one entity, but then purposefully break it out into two and just say paper, ass, digital, great. And the thing that might come out in Q1, and this will be interesting, is we just got the Warhammer stuff on Motos. What did that license cost? We don't know, because that was the problem. That's why the Warhammer 40K stuff didn't show up on Moto for a year or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Because that license either was still being discussed or WotC just didn't think was necessary. Either way, it doesn't exist for a while. They have to go out and attain it again for Moto. Now we have that. What happens if something in Fallout, which they announced will not be on Moto, pops and becomes a quote-unquote staple in Commander. Are they going to have to go back out and negotiate with Bethesda this license? Like, why wasn't it done the first time? Where will that hit? And now you have, like, this kind of weird balancing act to do with the books of, like, yeah, digital was great because we didn't pay for the licenses. Paper was ass because of licenses. I don't like how they break it out and they just try and jargon it and hand wave it away. And that is a big sticking point for me, especially when you're so excited to say that WotC basically carried your business this year again. Like, why can't we just get the numbers laid out appropriately so it's a lot easier to see and understand? But I am no economist.
Nor am I. And that's actually the frustrating thing, is that this is carrying your business. You've told your shareholders it's carrying your business. You've told anyone with a brain it's carrying your business. But you're not doing anything to nurture it.
Ooh.
You're just trying to drain it as much as you can, and it is absolutely wild to me.
All right. So what else you got?
So I think one of the other big ones was the revenue declining for fourth quarter, which, again, I just don't understand how you can do that as effectively not just a toy company, but a company which is geared towards children. And hey, sorry, reality is parents try to buy kids love. Christmas is when kids expect a lot of presents from everyone. If you make children's products, you can have a decline, not almost 25%.
Yep.
The economy wasn't even down half that for the year comparatively. So you just did really bad as a company. And if you can't manage that, I don't know what to do with it. But I believe you had something to talk about.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure, because it's basically going to kind of take us out of here and then, make sure we didn't kind of step over anything. So the goodwill. We talked about this last episode, pontificated, then we kind of got sad and talked about MH3 spoilers for a little bit and eventually came back. So goodwill loss is basically just writing down loss from the purchase of usually like another company, another IP, etc., that is just failing miserably. It is effectively loss. It's not a charitable goodwill. It's just another way to say, hey, we took lumps here. And cutting through a lot of the messaging, we see a ton of the goodwill is almost, I think, close to 80, 85% or something like that. On the Q4 2023 report is that it is associated with E1 alone. And then they made a really important point to call out PJ Masks and nothing else. But when the buy for E1 was made, as I mentioned, and I linked in the show notes for the previous episode, one of the biggest things mentioned in the buy after Peppa Pig was PJ Masks. And this buy didn't happen that long ago. So how bad are you at evaluating other organizations, what they do, and when you need to go out and spend? And this is damning on multiple levels. And the more I think about this, the worse it gets, because on top, it's just, you just think about it and okay, there are other toy manufacturers out there. There are other companies that own licenses for other things that are already doing things in your space, or maybe new things to your org. You want to incorporate them so you can look at what they're doing and you can either negotiate for a merger, a buyout, or you could attempt to buy the license, the IP, and do something similar yourself and spin it all up at home, right? Yeah. How can you trust that they're going to be able to do this successfully again? We did an episode a month or two ago about licenses and what Hasbro can look at and what they've lost, right? Yeah. And how can you even now trust them to evaluate licensing properly when they went out and they bought Peppa Pig? Fantastic. Credit where credit is due on that one. PJ Masks, apparently, pile of poop.
Yep.
So how can you now also trust them to evaluate licenses properly? You can come in behind the eight ball and get in on stuff. I mentioned Bluey. Bluey's been on for years now. There's still opportunity there. If Hasbro wanted to move into something, Disney Plus just picked up Bluey for streaming. Like, there's still, grist in the mill when it comes to Bluey, but how can you trust them to really evaluate anything else properly, from just corporate negotiations all the way down to which licenses we want to buy? We mocked them for letting go of the Disney Princess line and giving it to Mattel. And then that same year, Mattel also knocked out of the park the Barbie movie. Like, Mattel has, right now, just an iron grip on dolls. Like, and a handful of action figures. Like, you're just kind of losing. Mattel is just better at evaluating licenses right now. They're either better at structuring contracts, negotiations, whatever. But how can you trust HAS to do any of this properly? It is extremely damning looking back at the past couple of years and looking ahead to the future. This brand blueprint V2 thing that they're talking about, if it's only relevant to homegrown products or products that they're keeping around after the E1 sell-off, cool, great. They didn't mention how it would fit into the they did not mention how it would impact any kind of the lens or optics they would use when evaluating licenses, and now that is very worrisome because it's difficult to try and take the money that WotC makes and push it around to somewhere else to offset a loss. We know the Power Rangers brand, which they spent infinite money on as well, also hemorrhaging.
Still doing nothing with that license, and I don't understand how. It's such a good IP.
Doing nothing great. They keep making Power Ranger Lightning toys for adults. Fantastic.
That's awesome.
The show is still on somewhere. It's in syndication everywhere, but that brand is just not making Hasbro any money. They've upcycled Transformers how many times now, and it's just kind of sputtering out. There's a lot going on around licensing outside of Universes Beyond when it comes to the main brand that seems to be very questionable and leaves a lot to be desired. And that is one of the biggest takeaways I have from this, was just a poor evaluation of E1, an overestimation and a poor evaluation of the brands that they wanted from E1, and now it is costing them dearly.
Yeah, I think I want to know at what point, the exact moment when they decided it was a good idea to spend this money on E1. I want to know if they actually just said, oh, it'll be fine because we have these great ideas. We're going to have this magic show on Netflix and it's going to be amazing. Don't worry about it.
We'll make yet another D&D movie. Everything will be good.
Yeah. Or if they legitimately had trepidations about it. If it was, well, we've got all these great magic products going and they're going to fund all of this. Don't worry. They are going to make us rich. And that's where my question is, because I wonder at what point, maybe it was greed or overconfidence or sheer stupidity. At what point did they decide, all right, now we're going for it. Let's do the thing.
Mm-hmm.
But, oh, wells.
At the end of the day, after all is said and done, now that E1 has been shed, 2024 is really going to be the put up or shut up kind of year, I believe.
Yeah.
When everything was going down in the middle of 2020, was it 2022 or 2023 with the OGL? I can't remember. Time is a flat circle. 2023 with OGL and with the massive loss that we were seeing Hasbro take. I really thought that would be the time for another Alta Fox style conversation. With 2024 continues to be a nosedive for Hasbro. I really do expect there to be a lot of golden parachutes opened, and we will, in theory, see a takeover and a restructuring of the board, because at that point, Chris Cox can save nothing. This board is there to do nothing but sink the ship, and somebody will either have to write it or spin WotC off and let the one company making profit continue to make profit on their own.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, that's where I am on this. You have any kind of differing views or opinions coming out of this read?
No, I think, it's as hopeful as things have been over the past few months. The end of the year was just more of the same. And that's infuriating.
Yeah, that's fair. And worse.
Yeah.
It was the same, but worse.
The same, but way worse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. You ready for picks?
Let's do it.
All right. I'll go first so you can discuss your brand new card.
Yeah, okay.
I'm going with, I would say this is classic because I thought it was, but apparently it's not. This is a card from 2021. Vito, Thorn of the Dusk Rose. 2 and a black for a 1/3 legendary creature, vampire cleric. That reads, whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. And it has an activated ability. 3 and double black creatures you control gain lifelink until end of turn. So this is basically just meant to be this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, so to speak. When I was taking my notes, there were 302 listings on TCG Player for $7.72 market, and that is LP or better. Card Kingdom was buying 98 at $6.50, and they were selling 8 at $12.99. And this is for the M21 copy. It's been in Jumpstart and a bunch of other things. CK is now buying 104, so quantity has gone up a smidge, under 1%, but the buy number is still the same. And on TCG Player, there are 362 listings with a market of $7.64. So people are just kind of, this card spiked and people shoved into the market, so that we're just seeing a lot of low-hanging fruit exit the market right now. Cool, fine, whatever. I added this card to my list in November of 2023. Card King was buying 82 at $4.20. So we're looking at like a 70% increase-ish on buy price. There were 270 listings on TCG Player at $5.45. So we saw about like a 30% increase there. And CK only had 2 copies for sale at $7.50, which is an almost like 80% increase on in retail price. And when we take a look at this in Commander, because this is basically where it is played only, despite this being a legendary vampire, this is not really a popular commander. It is found there, but it's mainly found primarily outside vampire decks and within the 99. So you would think, being a legendary vampire, hey, this could helm our deck. Well, you got better options. One, in Soren Markov, like the best vampire commander there is and probably will ever be, but this card is espousing some different things than we would expect when we look at a legendary vampire. Now, broadly speaking, at the top level, everything Vito does fits inside most vampire-based commander decks by virtue of both its creature type as well as its passive and activated abilities, because vampires, at the end of the day, when you're playing it pretty casually, do just want to sit there and gain life. A lot of them have lifelink. And then there's also the Orzhov land from original Innistrad, Archangel's Vault or whatever, or Vault of the Archangel.
Oh yeah, Vault of the Archangel. Yep. That's the one.
Slots right in. Is it competitive in that deck, in the vampire deck? No, not really. But for casuals, it's perfect and a welcome addition to the 99. Then we dig in a little deeper and we see that this card gets more and more spiky, solely dependent on the pilot's desire to be competitive. Now, this is a redundant Sanguine Bond type effect, so if that passive sounds familiar, it is because it is word for word the enchantment Sanguine Bond. Now, Vito slots into decks looking to combo out the table with a version of the Sanguine Bond and Exquisite Blood combo. It is a redundant piece. These decks can be more on the casual side with only a few enablers and redundant pieces, or it could really lean in and be all about assembling the combo as quickly as possible with redundancies and plans within plans, because the more you dig in, again, the spikier people get, which means the more you need to be able to either go again, have a backup, or be able to pivot quickly. Now, we're looking at a card that plays at all echelons of Commander, and as such, it holds pretty wide appeal. You could even play this in just a generic life gain Commander deck where you do nothing but use Sanguine Bond style effects to kill the table, which is so incredibly pillow forty, it is ridiculous. And this, I think this is a great example of a casual and quote competitive unquote card through and through. It is aggressively costed. The stats on it are fine. The passive is great and plays into that pillow 40 life gain style deck, like I said. The activated, giving all your creatures lifelink, and then the passive just kind of helps drain the table out as you're swinging with like little poopy vampires. It is fantastic for that. When you want to dig in, and I don't want to bring up Rec for this a lot because it is very diluted. You can basically see that this slides into and synergizes with exactly what you expect, which is just Edgar Markov, What's the other one?
Vampire life
Yeah,
gain.
yes.
Combo. Yeah.
Combal, which is another big combo version of the deck. And even some weird mono black ones like Kokusho and Shieldred, where you're just trying to drain and gain the table out. Not on. Oh, barely on here is like Oloro Ageless Ascetic, which is like the slowest way to play the deck because it's from that cycle of commanders that has a passive ability that triggers in your upkeep. You gain 2 life. Cool. Awesome.
Everyone else loses 2.
Yeah.
But it gives you an uninteractable way to combo off.
Yes, it is, and it is a really good enabler. Or you could just play it really slow, like I mentioned, and just have a time of it. And that's kind of where, like, Rec is very difficult to parse this way. That's why I don't really want to crutch on it. But the more you dig in on your own, the more you see, like, wow, a lot of people can play this card in a lot of really weird and unique ways.
Yep.
Timeline, we're seeing between 12 and 15 copies sell a day, Nearman and LP. That was like over the last 2 weeks. Coming out of the recent Ixalan and Murders of Karlov Manor spike, we're seeing organic demand and price trending on this card, which is fantastic. Inorganic spikes are terrible. We don't want to see that. Because this card just isn't in quote vampire unquote base commander decks, I do think we will see this continue to trend upward over the next few months, and that'll let us exit into the open market in about 2 months' time. So that'll get us out of this kind of funk we're seeing where people are just exiting now because all of a sudden the card started to rebound after this unsustainable spike. And I'll show you this on stocks again. So when we zoom in after Ixalan and heading into Murders, we just see this spike and then we trend back down at about the same slope. And now we're kind of plateauing with a little hill right now. It's because that spike was unsustainable. Ixalan just didn't give us enough to do. And we got Vein Ripper and Murders at Karlov Manor, yes, but between those 2 sets, not enough to sustain that price spike. So people just kind of pushed back in or out into the open market, if you want to think about it that way. And so now we're just kind of waiting for those copies to float out, and then we'll be able to move ours in about, let us say, 2 months, and then we'll be good. So we're at a point where Nearman and LP foils are actually as cheap as a non-foil, and this is most likely due to the fact that M21 was the first core set with collector's boosters. That was a fun fact. And once we break out of that kind of price soup that we're seeing between the foils and non-foils, the price climbs pretty quickly on the non-foil towards $8 and then rapidly to $9. And that's got to be about 150 total copies sold. So we're looking at like a 2 or 3 week window on that. As far as buy lists are concerned, it's not likely they're seriously lagging behind the open market, but if retail velocity remains kind of low at the vendor level, then the buy list will probably remain a month or 2 behind. Sometimes we've seen it lag even more than that, but I don't think it's really going to be too much more. So if we buy in now, we'd probably be looking to exit the buy list in about 3 to 4 months as opposed to like 2-ish into the open market. Reprint equity on this one, interesting. Initially printed in M21, then reprinted in Jumpstart 2022 in the quote fangs unquote pack. This one is kind of hard to peg. Really, like, where are we going to see this next? Not sure. Core sets aren't tied to a plane, and vampires exist almost anywhere. Cool. What would I expect to see? Would I expect to see both Veto's effects outside of a core set, an Innistrad set, or a dedicated commander product? Not really. But we also have so many more interesting vampires to reprint before we get to Veto, so I would expect it to be a few years before we see this again. People are still clamoring for Edgar Markov to pop up again in some of the master sets and some of the ancillary printings and like commander sets that we see, like the draft sets, that I would expect something like that before we get to Veto. Buy quantity, I've said of these just from opening M21 product, but I wouldn't go any deeper than 8 if the plan was to exit to buy list, but the plan is to exit in trade or back into TCG player. I think about a dozen would be my ceiling based on how long it would take to move them all, which could be a couple of days if nobody's fighting you on price. And that's not bad to say like, oh, it took me like 3 days to sell a dozen of these. Like, no. You have to, like, what we're seeing here can still happen where people could exit at a lower price and now you're just in that price soup again. And it's going to take a little bit of time to like dribble them out. So that's where I would be for buy quantity if I wanted to move these.
So, wow, this card only came out 3 years ago.
Yes. But it's been reprinted.
I thought it was like 5 or 6.
Yep.
So I also thought this was a classic, but no, this is way too recent. The thing that I love about this card is, as you touched on, it has 2 incredibly relevant casual creature types in Vampire and Cleric, because it literally just slides into any of those as well.
Yeah,
because both of those also just kind of passively gain life.
Cleric is in the party keyword, the AFR keyword, right?
Yeah.
Okay, just checking. It's a bad keyword, but I can't remember all the jobs that go into it.
Yeah, Cleric was one of them.
Okay.
And this is just efficiently costed. It touches on the casual and can be used as like another enabler in 75%, though I won't say competitive. Yep. And despite all of the reprints, it still has this price point, and all of those reprints came in the last 3 years. That is what makes this card insane to me.
Yeah. I think it is really, like I said, the broad strokes appeal between like, hey, I want to play a vampires deck. I want to be mono black. Cool, we got you. We want to be more aggressive, play Orzhov. Cool, I got you. We want to play Edgar Markov. Cool, we got you. I want to
Mardu, whatever. Yeah, it's in there.
I want to combo kill people. Cool, we got you.
We got you. Yeah, it is a massive swath of EDH that it hits.
Yep.
Can't be mad at a card like that.
Nope, not at all.
I, on the other hand, am going for a card that I really hope hits a massive swath of EDH, and it is a new card from Universes Beyond Fallout, which cost Hasbro too much money and is going to cause a loss. But that doesn't matter, because the card Radstorm is going to win you games.
Mm-hmm.
Radstorm reads, blue 3, Storm Proliferate. That's it. That's the end. That's the card. This card's insane.
Agreed.
4 mana Storm Proliferate. Okay, now this may actually have enough of an impact on EDH that they reconsider the poison rules. So I like this card because of what reading the card says. Also, Fallout notably was one of the first Magic products in a very long time to have its allocation cut at the LGS level.
Mm.
People were told, no, we're going to have to give you less than you wanted. That hasn't happened in years. So I think that right now, when we're at what is effectively an all-time bottom of this card, if you take a look at the stocks graph, we've got low at like just under $4.
Yep.
Easily the time that we should be buying in, because this isn't going to get more opened than it is now. Maybe over the next 1 to 2 weeks, a few percentage points more, but not really.
In a month, Thunder Junction coming out too. So we should hit spoilers, and at that point, the product just kind of gets pushed aside. Yep.
Yeah, and just falls off a cliff. So we've hit like peak open here. This wasn't a set that had a bounty. This is a set that's going to sit around for a while, and there's not, it's done. We're not interested anymore. But this has potential, and if obviously EDH, and occasionally 60 card formats. And the reason I say that is if you take a look at the sales data on TCG Player, which thank you for not obfuscating that, guys, there are a few orders in there for 2, 3, and 4 copies. Now, the other thing about this card is that you're seeing about 60 copies a day move on TCG Player. That's insane liquidity for something that admittedly has 2 kind of niche keywords on it.
Yep.
You have to be very specifically in the Inexorable Tide deck for this to work. Or in some other weird kind of storm deck that proliferates +1/+1 counters or something. I don't know. But you basically have to be in that deck. Now, what's really telling, clicking 4 or more. So there are now 21 listings of 4 or more for this card. A week ago, there were 50. So we've basically halved. We've cratered from where we were.
Yep.
And that's drying up. And the price is not moving up. So this is going to be a card that I expect based on current velocity. We have 77 listings and roughly maybe, 400 copies, 500 copies in that. In this
Something
era
like
where the gaming code doesn't massive open anymore, you're not having a brick of like 500 copies of a card preventing it from pricing up. So if you take a look, you actually get to $7 within 2 pages here, and we're currently at 5. So there's a lot of opportunity to move on this card quickly. Now, in terms of timeline, that's where things get interesting, because this is, I'm going to guess, a card similar to Goblin Bombardiers from last year, where we're going to get to Eternal Weekend, and this card's going to skyrocket out of nowhere. You're going to see all of a sudden it's worth a ton because people are trying it in Storm. And, it takes 10. Yeah, it's the same as Tendrils. This kills just as fast as Tendrils.
9.
Or 9, yeah, sorry. It's just as fast, and you can start with, what is it?
Prologue to Phyresis.
Yes, that one.
This is why it takes 9 instead of 10. I'll bring this up real quick. Prologue to Phyresis is a blue instant. It costs 1 and a blue. Each opponent gets a poison counter, draw 1. So not only you put your first poison counter on there, but now you have a spell to proliferate off of. So when you cast Radstorm after that, you proliferate 2. That's 3 poison counters, 2 spells.
Yep.
So it's actually 1 spell less, and it requires generally either less red or less black, depending on which version of Storm you're playing.
Yeah. So it makes it an easier to access kill condition that's just, frankly, kind of more fun.
Yep.
As well.
You can't get Veil Summered. You can't get Leyline of Sanctity. Yep. You die to state-based effects. You can't gain life out of this. You can't Tef's Protection your way out of this either, I believe. People don't do that in Legacy, but I think that matters in Commander.
Yeah.
It is Prologue to Phyresis is already on the Rex page for this for popular instance.
Yeah. So I expect that come Eternal Weekend time is when you start to see this card move. Now, the reason I'm recommending getting in as early as we are, because obviously that's a few months away, is because, like I said, we're going to reach peak open before too long here, and this product's going to move away. Yeah. It will still be there, but it's not going to be like everyone's go-to product the way it is now because it's the hot new thing. Mm-hmm. Once we get Outlaws, people are going to move into that because, oh, I've got this for Modern and Legacy and Standard and Pioneer. And that's how it's naturally has gone.
Yep.
So I think now is the time to move in terms of quantity is where it gets kind of tricky. Obviously, this is primarily probably going to be an EDH card until Eternal Weekend. Because I personally am picking up this card to out at Eternal Weekend, I'm getting in multiples of 3. The reason 3 is because I really don't know how much of a 4 of you want this to be. Because you need another card beforehand to enable it.
Yep.
4 may be the way to go and just throw one in the wish board. It's probably the way to go. But I'm going in on multiples of 3 of this, and I'm getting 12 because it's also a multiple of 4, so I can cover both bases.
Yeah, that's fair.
But I'm a fan of this card because this is the kind of thing that at $5, I'm more than willing to take a chance on this as a Storm win condition. I remember when Mind's Desire was a $40 card because it was Storm's win condition and extended. Mm-hmm. There is a world where this card, even being a rare and a set with collector boosters, can get to $15. And I think that's not too far off from here. And I definitely want to get in now so I can take the triple up rather than the double because I'm greedy.
No, I get that. And I think this is one of those cards that I think is sneaky because, like you said, there are a lot of ways to do this inside Commander. So there are a lot of things to do with this. Whether or not it changes the poison ruling is just like another one of those questions where we had the last time with 1 when that set came out. Like we're tossed around poison really quickly, but at the end of the day, what mattered was the fact that like the cards just weren't good enough. And now we have a Storm Proliferate win con, and there are only so many ways to deal with that spell when it hits the stack. And Mindbreak Trap is like $100 card. Flusterstorm is a lot more accessible. What is it? Last Word, Obeka, Sundial of the Infinite can end the turn, so there's effects like that. You can remove the player from the game before the spell resolves. Like, these are all possible futures. But otherwise, this is, yes, a very difficult card to interact with. It requires minimal setup when you are playing Inexorable Tide ahead of time. This does things with rad counters, which by themselves are not a great element of the Fallout experience. They are slow, they are boring, but they add a little bit of mill when you can proliferate them and you start milling 10 plus cards in an upkeep attached to whatever you're going to be doing with Mesmeric Orb and other mill elements. It gets better as well. So you have that little bit of work to do. You have that element in front of you. I think Radstorm is a fairly appealing card because it interacts favorably with all types of counters, regardless of what they are, and there's a lot you can be doing with that. You can even proliferate your Darksteel Reactor to win the game. 20 counters, kaboom, you win. I think it's 20, not 10.
Yeah, I believe it's 20. Yeah.
Proliferate your Planeswalkers. Who cares? There's a lot that you can do here. This is really cheap. It just promotes playing the game and then casting the spell on the same turn. So at the end of the day, I like this card. I bought my constructed set plus a few extra because Lord knows how many I will need for a Storm deck in Legacy, like you mentioned. And it is a card that I also believe in, and a card that I also was watching on release weekend to figure out when to buy in. And like you mentioned, from hawking this, we can now see that we are on the up and up when it comes to this card. We are moving pretty quickly on it.
Yeah.
And once it goes, it's going to be gone. And then that's it. Like, they would have to universes within it. And I just don't think this is the kind of card they want to do that with. They seem to be pretty reticent to reprint Inexorable Tide. And that card is like a cornerstone of this type of deck.
Yeah. And not to mention that Storm, I think the scale's literally named after it in terms of how much they're going to reprint this. So I don't see this as something they'll ever reprint, not just because it's tied to Fallout, but because this, I mean, just read the card. It's insane.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, I like this for a look overall. I like it for a constructed look. I like it as a spec. I like it as a playable in Commander. And I think there's no way you can really go wrong with this card unless WotC does you a sneaky and reprints it somewhere like immediately. But again, because this is on the Storm scale, it is very difficult to see that this will be reprinted in any reasonable amount of time.
Yeah, if ever.
Mm-hmm. So I like the look overall. I think there's a lot of stuff to be looked at in Fallout. So if people want to go through, take a look at Rec. I know Star City and Goldfish already did their videos with the Fallout sets. When you set aside the dog meat deck, which I think is just completely overpowered when it comes to balance compared to the other three, there's a lot going on in all three of those decks. There's something to like in all of them. I think there's some very good specs in all of them. And I think Radstorm is probably one of the best in the set, but there's a lot of options in front of you. And depending on what your local meta likes to do, you can probably make some decent moves when you start diving through those decks and think about what your locals actually do and engage with. So I would recommend not just looking at Radstorm, but taking a look through the spoiler overall and see like, oh, Jenny plays this and Jack plays that and down the line, and start looking at these cards and start kind of picking up a lot of those staples that will be played from here on out, because I'll tell you, those decks have some fantastic cards that aren't the bobbleheads.
Yeah, this may have actually been one of the most well-designed sets of the last 5 years.
Yep.
The power level is high, but it's not like MH2 high where you're like, okay, this is going to define every format it's legal in.
Yep, and I think
it's just a lot of good cards.
This feels like one of the first sets where the face commander is, I don't want to say the correct commander, but when it comes to the deck overall, there's one theme and it fits with the face commander. The secondary commander, the ancillary commander can be played, but it is not what the other 98 cards in the deck are trying to do, where you've had this kind of split stuff prior. And one of the best examples I have is the Fractal deck from Strixhaven. One of the commanders wanted you to grow your fractals, the other one wanted you to clone them, and cloning a 0/0, that's not good. That is not good.
That's so bad.
That is a very difficult ask to clone a 0/0. And so this is the first time where it just feels like all the decks are cohesive. They work together. They were built purposefully. They were built mindfully. Whether or not they celebrate Fallout, well, I don't know. I've never played anything in that series, but I can tell you the decks are amazing and they have something for everybody, and I would investigate them. I think we talked about this before last week's episode. The majority of the bobblehead's useless, aside from Agility bobblehead, which gives your creature the weirdest type of evasion I've ever heard of. Can only be blocked by creatures with haste.
Yep. What?
Yeah, that is the weirdest thing I've ever heard. And if I had to guess like one random card to just make a splash in the entirety of the Commander format from all this after Radstorm, it's going to be, I believe it's the Agility bobblehead.
Fair. Yeah, I could see that.
Like, these decks just have great options. Right now, everybody's fawning over Mothman. Like, cool, but Caesar, also great because
Caesar's insane.
Net
he
positive.
Just fuels himself.
Yes.
How could you not love that?
Sack one creature. It could be a token. Make two 1/1 tokens. Cool. So you sack 1/1, you get two. Net positive. Awesome. Like, it's built into the card. It's built into a 3-mana commander. I think, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, why not? Absolutely go for it. Take your time, cut through these spoilers. There's something in there for everybody. I think this is a great set overall to just pick up a handful of staples across each one of the decks and just enjoy your time.
Yep.
But do you have anything else before we cut out?
Nope. We're going to cut out.
For at MtG Cabalcast on Twitter, Facebook, Patreon, and YouTube, I am at Halt. I am Reptar. You are
at Damon_Thurston.
And we'll see you next week.